As Nnamdi tried to tighten the lid, bundles of foreign currency burst out, scattering into the muddy water. Ifeoma gasped, clutching her chest, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Nnamdi, what is this?" Gold bars clinked against each other, heavy and shining even in the dark. Papers stamped with government seals floated in the water. For a long moment, they stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. They had dug for grief, but uncovered fortune. Their daughter's coffin had become a treasure chest. The sound of scraping wood echoed in the dead of night, disturbing the silence of Chief Maduka's mansion. Emeka, his only son, was drenched in sweat as he dragged a heavy coffin across the marble floor. His heart pounded with anger, his hands blistered from gripping the edges, yet he did not stop. That coffin, polished and expensive, was not meant for a corpse. It was his father's obsession, a strange vault built to house money instead of bones. Emeka did not care. All he knew was that he had been humiliated for the last time, insulted and beaten by a father who valued cash more than blood. And so, in a fit of rage, he chose the only revenge that made sense. He would take away the very thing his father loved most. By dawn, the coffin that once stood in the mansion of a powerful politician was now dumped outside a poor carpenter's shop, sold for almost nothing. Emeka had not bothered to check its contents, nor did he know the depth of his actions. He simply spat on the ground and walked away, leaving behind a fortune that could change destinies. The carpenter admired the polished wood, unaware of the treasure hidden inside. He thought only of how quickly he could resell it to feed his hungry children. And so, the coffin's journey began, leaving behind the arrogance of the wealthy and inching toward the trembling hands of the poor, who had no idea what miracle fate was preparing for them. Chief Maduka's mansion towered like a fortress at the edge of the city. Golden gates gleamed in the sun, imported chandeliers lit up the hallways, and armed guards paced the compound like restless dogs. In his study, Chief Maduka sat surrounded by smoke from his thick cigars. He was a man feared by many, a man who bought judges like roasted corn and silenced rivals with hidden bullets. Yet, despite all his wealth, he trusted nothing, not banks, not allies, not even his own family. His fortune, stacked in foreign currency and gold bars, was hidden where nobody would think to look, inside his coffin. To him, the coffin was not a symbol of death, but a throne of arrogance. He often laughed and said, "Even in death, I will sleep on my riches." But Chief Maduka's arrogance was poisoning his home. His wife had grown weary of living like a shadow in his palace. She ate alone, cried alone, and raised her voice only in silence. His son, Emeka, carried resentment like fire in his chest. He wanted freedom, but his father forced him to launder money, to follow politics, to kneel before men he despised. Every insult, every slap, every cruel word built a mountain of bitterness in him. And so, when he dragged that coffin away, it was not just wood he was moving. It was years of anger bursting open. Yet, far away, fate was already arranging another household, poor and broken, to receive the gift hidden within. In a swampy village far from the glowing lights of the city, a small family struggled to survive. Nnamdi and his wife, Ifeoma, were farmers, but their land was cursed with floods. They fished in muddy waters and patched their leaking roof with palm fronds. Hunger was not a visitor in their home, it was a permanent resident. Yet, they clung to hope and to their only daughter, Chioma, whose laughter was the one light in their darkness. She was their reason to fight each day, the heartbeat that reminded them that even in poverty, life could still smile. But when sickness struck, their small world began to collapse. Fever burned the child, her cough echoed in the night, and no amount of herbs or borrowed medicine could silence her pain. Nnamdi and Ifeoma carried her from one clinic to another, their feet blistered, their pockets empty. Doctors turned them away, herbalists shook their heads, and neighbors whispered about curses. In the end, poverty won. One evening, Chioma's small chest stopped rising, and her mother's scream carried through the village like a broken trumpet. The family wailed, their tears soaking the mud floor of their hut. But even in death, poverty mocked them. They could not afford a coffin. They thought of burying her in mats, but shame held them back. And just when despair threatened to swallow them whole, a carpenter offered them a coffin at a price so low, they thought it was a trick. It was the same coffin Emeka had thrown away, now moving into its final role. The villagers gathered as Nnamdi and Ifeoma lowered their daughter's small body into the ground. The coffin looked too fine for their poverty, polished and strong, yet grief blinded them from asking questions. Ifeoma knelt by the grave, clutching the soil with trembling fingers, whispering prayers into the wind. Nnamdi stood stiff, his eyes swollen, his heart torn between anger at his helplessness and fear of what life would become without Chioma's laughter. The rain began to fall, and the muddy ground swallowed the coffin quickly. People wept, others sang dirges, and in the distance, thunder rolled like drums of sorrow. By the time the grave was covered, husband and wife were empty shells, broken and unsure of tomorrow. For months after the burial, the graveyard became their refuge. Every evening, Ifeoma sat there, talking to her daughter as if she could still hear. Nnamdi often stood behind, silent, staring at the mound of earth. Yet life showed them no mercy. Hunger grew sharper, debts piled higher, and the floods grew worse. One night, after heavy rain, the graveyard was swallowed by water. Graves opened, coffins floated, and the earth returned what it once swallowed. Panic spread across the village, and families rushed to rescue what was left of their dead. Nnamdi and Ifeoma waded into the flood, desperate to save the coffin that held their daughter's body. They did not know that this painful act would open the doors of destiny. With shaking hands, Nnamdi and Ifeoma pulled the coffin from the murky water. The wood had cracked from the force of the flood. In the flickering light of their lantern, something strange happened. As Nnamdi tried to tighten the lid, bundles of foreign currency burst out, scattering into the muddy water. Ifeoma gasped, clutching her chest, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Nnamdi, what is this?" Gold bars clinked against each other, heavy and shining even in the dark. Papers stamped with government seals floated in the water. For a long moment, they stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. They had dug for grief, but uncovered fortune. Their daughter's coffin had become a treasure chest. Fear and disbelief wrestled with joy in their hearts. Ifeoma wept, calling her daughter's name, convinced it was her spirit blessing them. Nnamdi gathered the money with shaking hands, glancing around to be sure nobody was watching. They carried the gold, the cash, and the papers back to their hut, their hearts pounding as if the night itself had eyes. That night, husband and wife did not sleep. They sat in silence, staring at the bundles stacked on their floor. They did not know whether to laugh or to tremble. All they knew was that destiny had turned in their favor, and the same coffin that carried their sorrow was now carrying their salvation. While Nnamdi and Ifeoma sat in their hut, staring at an unexpected miracle, Chief Maduka's mansion grew restless. Servants whispered in fear as the chief stormed through the corridors like a wounded lion. He had discovered the coffin was missing, and with it, his hidden fortune. He ransacked his study, tore through secret rooms, and interrogated guards with venom. None could give him an answer, and his fury only deepened. For the first time in years, the man who once controlled ministers and generals felt powerless. He screamed Emeka's name, demanding answers, but his son avoided him like plague. Maduka's empire had always rested on fear and wealth, and now one pillar had crumbled. The shadow of ruin crept into his golden palace. He called his political allies, desperate to raise funds, but they laughed behind his back. Without his fortune, he was of no use to them. His wife, long neglected, watched in silence as his strength collapsed. To the world outside, the mansion still glittered, convoys still came and went, but inside it smelled of decay. Chief Maduka stopped laughing, stopped smoking, and stopped sleeping. His nights became a parade of nightmares where coffins floated in floodwaters, carrying his money away. He did not know where it had gone, but he swore he would find it. Yet destiny had already moved it far from his reach. Back in the swampy village, Nnamdi and Ifeoma guarded their secret with trembling hearts. At first, they did not spend the money, fearing it might be a curse. They buried some of the gold beneath their floor, hid bundles of dollars inside cooking pots, and tucked the strange government papers into clay jars. Every knock at the door made them jump. Every shadow outside the hut looked suspicious, yet slowly, hunger and need forced them to act. They bought food, medicine, and clothes, and for the first time, their table was full. People noticed their sudden change, but the couple explained it away as blessings from relatives abroad. Nobody questioned further, for poverty was so common that nobody believed miracles could fall into such hands. But the papers troubled Nnamdi. He could not read them fully, but he saw the seals, the signatures, the strange names of powerful men. He knew they carried danger. At night he told Ifeoma, "We must be wise. This is not only money, it is fire. If we misuse it, it will burn us." His wife nodded, holding her chest as though her daughter's spirit was listening. They made a vow never to boast, never to waste, never to reveal. Instead, they began to dream quietly of building a life not just for themselves, but for the village that had pitied them in their grief. Their miracle would not be their downfall. Within a year, the face of the swampy village began to change. A new school rose where children once sat under trees. A small clinic appeared where mothers had once carried sick babies miles away for help. Farmlands were expanded, fishing nets were replaced, and small traders began to prosper. Behind all of it stood Nnamdi and Ifeoma, still living simply but spreading their hidden wealth with wisdom. People called them blessed. Some whispered about secret favors from the gods, but nobody knew the truth. The same coffin that carried away their sorrow had carried in a future brighter than they ever imagined. Poverty slowly loosened its grip on the village, and for the first time in years, joy rang louder than wailing. Meanwhile, in the city, Chief Maduka was a broken man. His enemies used his downfall as a stepping stone. His properties were seized, his political party abandoned him, and his name became a joke in the newspapers. Emeka had left the mansion, vanishing into the streets, and his wife, weary of suffering, returned to her family. The mansion became empty, a carcass of what once shone. And each night, the chief sat alone, clutching his head, whispering curses against the day his coffin disappeared. He had thought himself untouchable, but he was now just another fallen giant, mocked by those he once ruled. Chief Maduka's health crumbled under the weight of his loss. His once broad shoulders bent, his face grew gaunt, and his hands shook when he tried to light a cigar. He often walked to the empty room where the coffin had once stood, staring at the empty space like a grieving man staring at a grave. He spoke to it sometimes, muttering, "You betrayed me. You carried away my kingdom." Neighbors whispered that he had gone mad, that the spirits of the dead were haunting him. He hired prophets, priests, even witch doctors, begging them to trace the coffin, but none could help him. Every effort ended in failure, and the man who once owned half the city now lived on borrowed coins. In the swampy village, the story was the opposite. Nnamdi and Ifeoma's names spread like wildfire. They were called helpers, builders, saviors of the poor. Yet they remained humble, never showing the true source of their fortune. Ifeoma often stood at the grave of her daughter, whispering prayers of thanks, believing the child had become their guardian. To them, the coffin had not been a curse but a vessel of deliverance. They remembered the pain, but now they lived with purpose. And while the politician's empire rotted, the humble family's influence grew. The coffin had indeed chosen its side, not with the proud, but with the lowly. In the end, Chief Maduka died alone, surrounded not by wealth or servants, but by silence. His coffin, when it finally came, was a cheap wooden box, bought by distant relatives. There was no gold, no hidden fortune, no legacy of glory. His name became a warning, a bitter story whispered to young men about the futility of greed. The mansion that once glittered was sold off, its walls cracked, its halls echoing with emptiness. The man who once laughed at the world had been laughed out of it. His son never returned, his wife never looked back, and his riches were forever lost to him. Greed had built his coffin, and greed had buried him. But in the swampy village, the air smelled of hope. Nnamdi and Ifeoma raised new children, educated others, and built a legacy not on arrogance, but on kindness. Their story spread quietly, inspiring others to believe that even the lowest can rise when destiny shifts. The coffin that once carried their pain became the silent foundation of their joy. And so, the tale ended where it began, with a coffin. Only this time, it carried not money, not bones, but a lesson. Greed is a coffin. No matter how deep you hide it, the earth will one day open, and the riches of the wicked will find their way into the hands of the humble.